Sacred sites have been going on for thousands of years. I mean, the oldest one I can think of is Gunung Padang, which is this pyramid in Indonesia, which the archaeologists don't want to talk about because the dates are very uncomfortable. I mean, they've done core samples drilled out of there, and they show quite clearly by an archaeologist who's been completely destroyed by the archaeological mafia, as I call it, that it's over 20,000 years old. That's not going to sit very well in all the books that we wrote about the past. Next thing you can look at is Tiwanaku up in Lake Titicaca in Bolivia. All the stones of its quadrangle are aligned to the positions of the sky as it looked in 15,000 BC. There's a problem right there. And all you have to do is listen to the stories that were commemorated by people like the Aboriginal culture in Australia. I mean, they remember when a meteorite hit the outback a million years ago, and then they were proved to be correct. And they rolled their eyes and they said, "We got older stories than that." I mean, I love their sense of humor. It's so dry. It's almost British, isn't it? Oh, we got older stories than a million years. What do you want to know? And that's what I like doing. I want to hear from the people whose ancestors were closer to the events than any European academic. Okay, not because the European academics are wrong per se. It's because their people were closer to the event. You see, and it goes through the experience is remembered in folklore and in tradition, oral tradition from one generation to the next. And when I collect these around the world, they all come together and they begin to overlap. Now, if we were not going around the world talking to each other, let's say 8,000 years ago, how come the stories all overlap? And sometimes they finish and then they pick up in another country somewhere else. It shouldn't be happening. And the one thing that keeps coming up again and again and again is that as hunter gatherers are now beginning to get their act together, and we're in the middle of the Ice Age, we have a parallel civilization all around the earth that basically were the gods. And then you have to ask yourself, well, are these real or metaphysical beings? Well, they were real people. The Sumerians called them half human, half divine, and they were human-like but not quite human. That's a lovely phrase. And it turns out, from the evidence that we have from giants' graves in Europe, they were 8 feet tall. I don't know how much that is in meters, about 2.7 meters maybe, around there. So very, very tall. And they were light-skinned compared to Polynesian people and any other people on the planet. And they had blonde hair with green eyes and red hair with blue eyes. And I hear this from every single culture on the planet. Even the Maori talk about this. In fact, the first Europeans that arrived in Polynesia in the 15th century, they said there was a lot of blonde people in Tahiti. How the hell did that happen? How the Caucasians ended up in Tahiti? And they said, well, we intermarried with the gods at the end of the flood, at the end of the Ice Age, because they didn't survive either. We had to interbreed in order to keep the bloodlines alive. And I hear this everywhere I go. So for me, that's very real. And when I start hearing about people saying, well, these are the people that originally built the original temples using big stones. By the time we get to the time of the Inca, for example, we got little stones and these things fall apart in every earthquake. And then you got the Europeans showing up with their mortar and their bricks. That falls apart every 5 years. So we're actually regressing in terms of temple building. So whoever was building the original sites knew about the laws of nature and how to bend those rules. And that's another phrase I hear all the time. They knew how to work with nature. They knew how to bend the rules. And that's why they did incredible things. Not because it was an alien technology. It's alien to us because today we're so removed from nature that we don't understand it. And yet, if you look at the stories of the temples being built overnight, using big stones, and there was sound involved, either a trumpet, a musical instrument, or the voice was also telling the stones to move through the air. You hear this in many cultures. Well, in Princeton, back in the 80s, they looked at this story and they said, well, what if it's possible that the reason why they brought these stones from such a long way away, sometimes as much as 400 miles away, is because of the content. Now, the content of these stones is a specific type of quartz, and it's a lot of it. So they found the quartz, they put it in this tube, and they kept throwing sound at it in a laboratory. And I don't know if the website's still up because these people have died of extreme old age now. But back in the 80s and the 90s, when I found this on their website, it led me to it was one of the reasons why I wrote my second book, actually, was that they found the right frequency to throw at the lump of quartz and it started to levitate above the table in the laboratory. That's how we know that these things are real. So there was a parallel civilization that built the original temples, and we've been rebuilding things ever since then. Pyramids of Giza, 10,500 BC, they get hit by a flood. They're pretty big. They're not going to go anywhere. But if you go there, and I've been there 28 times now, and you look at what's left, you can see that there's been some retrofitting. There have been other things that are done to take out stones that are weathered by a lot of water, and new stones are being put back in. It's a constant rebuilding and a rehabbing project. And if you look at the temples adjacent to the pyramids of Giza, you'll see some serious water damage. And it doesn't take even someone with a degree in geology, and I've got a geology 101, but even that alone, I can tell when something has been worn by sitting in a very fast-flowing current of water. And it's right there next to the Great Pyramid. And people miss this all the time. They look at the pyramid, but not the temple next to it. So this is what was going on. These gods, which basically a god is anyone who understands the spirit of nature, water. If I want to look at water, understand water and how it works and how it doesn't, I become the god of water. That's how it happens. So any human being, any individual can become a god. That's what it means. We've been taught to look at God from a different lens because of the Judeo-Christian tradition, which is completely wrong, because by then they had no idea what they were talking about, because they borrowed their information from people who already had experience of this thousands of years earlier, and what they were reading made no sense to them. So there was this parallel civilization here on Earth, and they too didn't fare well during the end of the Ice Age, but the remains are all around.
I do wonder if there were even sites pre them, like you said, like New Zealand has some of these really incredible um, sites which are just formed via nature. Like nature just has its own emanation of like
Yeah.
what's going on here. There's
And some of the sites are natural as well. Like I said, the birthplace of the gods, it's a natural landscape temple where they took the actual stones that were there. Some may have been moved, by the way, because they don't look like they were standing there originally. If you follow the original pattern of erosion, that shouldn't be happening. That outcrop should not be there. But you can see under the right circumstances they've been shaped by human hands to portray a story, telling. And I didn't realize this until I read the oral tradition that was published of the Waitaha sometime later, and found out that they said, oh, it was our ancestors that actually came here with these molds, and they went chock, 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 and they shaped these stones to portray a teaching. That's why when you go to this stone, you think, oh, this stone represents blah, blah. Well, yes, it does, because it's still shaped like that. So we went from that, from the Aboriginal culture of understanding the spirit of place and sensing sacred plates without having anything built there, to, oh, well, we'll take some shapes on the land and then we'll shape them to teach people about the teachings. And then after that, as we're losing the plot even more, we better build some pyramids and some big temples with big stones to make sure that when people lose the plot in the 21st century, they'll know where to go to find this stuff. You can sense it, feel it, understand it, intellectualize it, but the energy is still there. So you can see that one thing develops from a natural algorithm, and then it becomes a man-made interpretation of nature.
Hey there, Inspired Evolutionary. If you absolutely love this, well, then here's a full conversation with this guest on the Inspired Evolution podcast. Check it out now.